Additionally, to all those listening, please feel free to send your questions through the Q&A box, and we will be picking those questions throughout today's session. You're welcome to provide any feedback you have on our digital events through webinars@fip.org. And if you'd like to be a member of FIP, please visit www.fip.org/membership_registration. Next slide. Today, we are excited to be speaking about a very important topic that largely affects the African region. And today we're excited to just focus a little bit on the East African region and to understand how we can close the medicine supply gap in the Africa region. Next slide. Our event agenda will involve a keynote on the issues on the medicine supply issues in the Africa region that will be presented by Jocelyn, and then we will jump right into a moderated discussion with esteemed panelists from the region as well as the globe, and we will finally wrap up and conclude the discussion, and we hope that it will be absolutely useful for you as you leave here having understood one or two things. Next slide. Now, FIP has a vision of a world where everyone benefits from access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable medicines and health technologies. And our mission is to support global health by enabling the advancement of pharmaceutical education, practice, and sciences. And the East African region, encompassing Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda, is grappling with a number of healthcare challenges. Over 90% of the drugs are imported, and this causes supply chain issues and shortages of essential medicines and medical supplies. This shortage affects common drugs, non-communicable disease treatments, and even medical equipment. The private sector is a crucial player in providing solutions, but it faces barriers in terms of limited capital and regulatory hurdles in their respective countries. In the report by Jeremy Holmes that you can access by scanning the QR code on your screen, the former CEO of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society and an experienced economist details the investment opportunities that exist in contract manufacturing, pharmaceutical packaging, medical supplies, and healthcare data systems. As Jeremy's report highlights, each country has its own specific challenges that we hope to hear about today, and that foreign direct investment is a potential solution to these specific challenges. A link to the report has also been shared in the chat with you. Next slide. Now, at the end of this event, we hope that you as a listener will be able to, one, understand the gaps that are there in access to medicines in Africa. And here it's a unique focus as well on the East African region. Secondly, we hope that you will recognize the challenges that are faced by the East African healthcare systems with regards to medicine supply. And third is that you will be able to evaluate the role of the private sector in addressing healthcare challenges in East Africa with a focus on pharmaceutical manufacturing. Next slide. I'll now hand it over to Jocelyn Chaibva, who is a pharmacist, a registered pharmacist in Zimbabwe, and he's also the director at New Fife Avenue Pharmacy in Harare. She's been a board member of the Pharmacy Regulatory Boards, the Pharmacist Council of Zimbabwe, and the Medicines Control Authority, and also a past president of the Pharmaceutical Society of Zimbabwe and a past chairperson of the Community Pharmacists Association of Zimbabwe. She's a holder of a postgraduate diploma in procurement and supply chain and an MBA, and currently the president of the African Pharmaceutical Forum. Jocelyn will share a brief keynote on the medicine supply challenges that we face in the African region. Over to you, Jocelyn.
Sorry. Thank you, Desireh, for the introduction, which is quite fancy, and I'm actually quite pleased to be on this platform this afternoon, just to give a brief overview of where we are coming from as African Pharmaceutical Forum and where we intend to go. In terms of the FIP development goals, we are looking at access to medicines as one of the 21 FIP development goals. In that vein, the African Pharmaceutical Forum has come up with a number of topics for discussion, including access to medicines as one of our key areas, access to medicines in cases of emergencies, the humanitarian aspects, and access to medicines and sustainable availability of those medicines. And we're also looking at when you look at medicines, antimicrobial resistance. So as African Pharmaceutical Forum, we've got this portfolio which follows in tandem with the FIP and the WHO under Sustainable Development Goals. So in this situation, as APF, with one of the topics which we've thought would be of importance for us to discuss and to address as pharmacists in the public and private sector is access to medicines, which in terms of the development goals, FIP development goals, is the development goal number 18. And it reads, access to medicines and medical devices and services. And as pharmacists in the private sector and in the public sector, we are trying to ensure that patients will have access to quality medicines. So when you look at the development goals from FIP, it has got various facets, but the one we're focusing on today is access to medicines. And what is it, which is, what are the challenges which are being faced by our people? So the item I'll be looking at is about supply chain as an overview about the supply chain. Who are the players or the components of our supply chain? So when you look at medicines, you start off with the various players. And as always referred to, usually we say the weakest link is usually what makes the link which shows the strength of the chain. So where is our weakest link in the access to medicines, in the supply chain of medicines in Africa? And when you look at Africa, where it's different countries, but we've got a very similar issues, be it Central Africa, West Africa, or East Africa. So where is the weakest link? Which is what would then create the gap in the medicine supply. And what is the gap which needs to be addressed? Just the whole picture, we're looking at research and development. There could be a gap on the disease patterns and the research. Are we getting the right medicines for the right people and so on? And then we also have manufacturing of those products after the research and development. Are we manufacturing APIs, which is active pharmaceutical ingredients? How are we getting them? Is there a gap there? And the production of the pharmaceutical products, the cough mixtures, the tablets, and we have had challenges in the recent past on a number of products. And of these products which are being manufactured, are they of good quality? And when all this is being done, how are we deciding in our different countries what we need and the quantities? So we look at even the policymakers are involved as far as quantification and storage and distribution. In the private sector, you have the wholesalers, and we also have distribution units in the public sector. But with all this, we should always remember some of the gaps are about the financial constraints which are met or which we have in different countries. And as we always know, there's never enough money, but whatever is available should be used sustainably and equitably so that our patients will receive their medicines in the right quantities and also the right quality. And also within that same picture, we also have the human resources who is able to do the distribution, this supervision, the manufacturing. So it's a whole picture or a whole spectrum of resources which are required. So we are looking at the human resources, the financial resources, and do they have the correct expertise? And as FIP, under the banner of APF, we have got a number of areas which we are dealing with. And as I said earlier on, access to medicines under development goal number 18 is what we need to look at. And different countries, they've got different issues. So in this presentation this afternoon, we'll be hearing from the East African community. At some point, we'll probably discuss or hear what is happening in other regions in Africa, like the West African community, the SADC, which is Southern Africa. But for today, we are looking at East Africa. What is their problem in terms of their gap? What is it which is happening in East Africa to try and address this gap? And as pharmacists, where do we come in to ensure that there's availability of quality medicines for our people? So under the African Pharmaceutical Forum, as I said earlier on, we've got a number of projects which look at the availability of medicines, storage and distribution of those medicines. And one of the issues, some of the things which we are dealing with is we had a project where we are lobbying for electricity. Some people might wonder, what has electricity got to do with supply of medicines? Well, production, they need electricity for production. In distribution, they also need electricity for storage. And even in the community pharmacies or in the hospital pharmacy, we also need electricity. And what is there which can be done to improve access to electricity and ensure that we have quality medicines from point A to point Z? And then we also have been talking as African Pharmaceutical Forum, fight against substandard and falsified medicines. This results in poor access or access to, we end up with poor access to medicines. We don't have quality medicines. And fight against substandard and falsified medicines and medical devices is one of our targets as African Pharmaceutical Forum. And when we talk about African Pharmaceutical Forum, we're talking about all the pharmacists, wherever you are in Africa, and with the support and collaboration with our colleagues who are pharmacists the world over. Because as pharmacists, we've got a role to play to ensure that we have access to good quality medicines. And we have to work as associations within our countries and work with the governments within our countries, and also in the region with the WHO to ensure that our people will have quality medicines and there's access for everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Desireh.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for that brief keynote on the supply challenges that we face in the Africa region. I love that you have tried to tie it in with all the areas that form the chain. And I love that you mentioned that we are only as strong as our weakest link. And so we look forward to hearing our panelists today and just zero in a little bit on the East Africa perspective and be able to understand what challenges they're facing when it comes to getting the right medicines to their people, any issues they are facing when it comes to regulatory environment when it comes to the manufacturing side of things, and also speak a little bit about the financial constraints that you've talked about, that we need finances, and even the little that we have needs to be used sustainably. I'm now pleased to introduce our panelists, and I will kindly ask them to turn on their cameras as well. I'll begin with Mr. Darius Uzabakiriho from Rwanda. Darius is a senior pharmacist and health system strengthening expert with a diverse background spanning pharmaceutical manufacturing, health policy analysis, pharmaceutical supply chain management, and regulation of medicines and pharmacists. With extensive experience in both governmental and non-governmental spheres, he possesses exceptional interpersonal skills, leadership qualities, and a knack for effective communication with senior policymakers. Darius holds a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy from the National University of Rwanda, a Master of Science in Professional Practice from Lancaster University in the UK, and he is concurrently pursuing a PhD in Public Health at the University of Rwanda and the University of Liverpool in the UK. Currently, he serves as the Chief Operations Officer and co-founder of Irebe Biotech Limited. Welcome, Darius.
Thank you.
Next, we have Professor David Taylor, who is an Emeritus Professor at the University College London.
Genuine, there's no need to give a long introduction for me. It's just someone who's had a lifetime's interest in effective medicines and effective medicine supply.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for joining us. And we also have Mr. Moderator, who is a supply chain expert with local and international experience for over 20 years. He is vastly experienced in designing, planning, implementing, and monitoring health supply chain systems. Mr. Tukai is a pharmacist licensed in Tanzania, and is a pharmaceutical management systems expert acquired through the MSc course in pharmaceutical services and medicines control, and a procurement and supply management professional registered under the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supplies in the UK. Welcome, Mr. Maveri. Finally, we have Mr. Jeremy Holmes, who is an economist who has led numerous international research projects and published widely in the health economics literature. Now semi-retired, he recently published Healing the Great Rift, an analysis of how to improve access to medicines in East Africa based on a 2-month field research. He's currently involved in promoting investment in the domestic supply chain in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. Although not a pharmacist, Jeremy writes regularly for the Pharmacy Press, and he has a double first from Oxford University and previously held a national position in UK higher education. Welcome, Jeremy. I will begin the discussion from where Jocelyn left off, and I know Jeremy has a lot of experience on the challenges that we have, but I'll begin by asking our colleagues from the East Africa region. I'll begin with Darius on what unique medicine supply gaps or challenges exist in your country at the national level, and what ripple effects do these gaps have on the healthcare system? Kindly elaborate with as much detail as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I thank you for inviting me in this webinar. As you mentioned, I'm based in Kigali, Rwanda, which is a country in East Africa. So as you asked, what is the challenge here in Kigali and Rwanda? Mainly, I would start by saying that the bigger challenge we are having is that 90%, if not more, of medicine and health technology used in the Rwanda are imported. They're imported abroad, and mainly from India and China and Europe. So we are relying on importation. Yet we are also a landlocked country. And this creates a very big effect on how on the supply and the supply of medicine and the other health technologies, which is reflected in having stockouts. And when you say stockouts, you said, as we all know, medicine forms one of the 6 pillars of the health system strengthening. So this is a very big challenge. And this is also coupled with a limited number of local manufacturers in Rwanda, manufacturer for both medicine, finished products, active pharmaceutical ingredient, and another important aspect, which is the packaging materials for medicine. They are all lacking here in Rwanda. And again, as I'm speaking, we only have one university teaching pharmacists in Rwanda. There is a limited number of training programs for pharmacists and the other health supply chain professionals. And this creates a huge impact on the availability of both essential medicine and non-essential medicine. And maybe I would stop by giving also good news, which also motivated us to start in the manufacturing of here in Rwanda. Rwanda is one of the second country where business is easy in Africa. And when you invest in manufacturing, you are eligible for a holiday of 7 years on corporate income taxes. And this is really important in the vision of the country to become a hub of pharmaceutical manufacturing. You have heard that Biotech for vaccine is coming. We are becoming the host of Africa Medicine Agency. And really here we are having a very strong regulatory environment, which is one of the requirements, because we don't need drug to be manufactured. We need to have drug of the right quality available to the community. So manufacturing itself is one aspect, but also as we tackle the issue, we need to tackle an issue on the quality. As Jocelyn mentioned, Africa also is facing substandard, and a very good regulatory environment is necessary to close this gap. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that response, Darius. I will move on to Mavere for your perspective.
Thank you very much. It's a little bit tricky to respond to this question in a generic way. So I think the best thing is to take the angle. And being a CEO of the Central Medical Store, I'll take the angle of a system rather than the outcome, because the stockout is an outcome. But if you look at the system, then you have to look at the whole universe surrounds the access issues. And that's a global, regional, country-specific, and probably institutional or professional at district levels. So if you look at the whole source, challenge has been identified as 90% of the products are imported. But is the solution local manufacturing? If yes, what makes local manufacturing being a solution? So you have to look at the whole factors around. You have to look at all the factors around the local production, the enabling environment, the cost of production, capacity of people, and everything. So the local production is a good solution, but it comes at a back package that needs to be beyond the manufacturing or pharmaceutical manufacturing sector itself. Looking at the cost, so look at the taxes, look at the import these challenges, look at the API access, look at the all regulatory requirement in terms of financial, in terms of taxes, in terms of products themselves. So I think it's tough to factor just being able to produce locally as a solution. But it's good if we are able to manufacture a quality, affordable, and readily available product in country. So I think the question number one is access a problem because we're importing? Or is access a problem because you cannot access the product wherever they are? That's number one. So on my side, I think enablers are important for us to manufacture locally. And number two, when it comes to now the issues of importation versus local manufacturing, you look at every country now in Sub-Sahara, we're all opening factories. We're all registering new manufacturing plants. But what are the population, what are the target people that we are going to supply to? So access will be there, but is it sustainable? Is it value for money, for example? That's another question which we have to look. And I think borrowing from SADC initiative, probably we need to zone this access. Otherwise, we may be having a huge, I don't know how to put it in a good English, a huge event where each country is celebrating establishing new manufacturing sites that they may not last because their quantities demanded are lower to meet all the economies of scale for the production. So I think the access issue has to be taken holistically, and primary reason has to be, do you get the product? Is it of quality? Is it accessible all the time? Are there any barriers that need to be addressed? Local manufacturing, yes. So I think you need to segment the products that you want to manufacture locally because you can afford them, and also other because of the global volumes, then they can give you a bargain price. So I think answering to the access as an institution, I look at where can I afford the best value for money for the product. Number two, coming at the regional, and I think this is where I want to challenge ourselves, is individually, all countries are celebrating new factories. And now what we're seeing now is the risk of, I have a new factory to produce infusions in Tanzania that was selling these infusions to Kenya, Uganda, DRC, Zambia, and Malawi. Next year, Malawi opens their own factory. Then I'm blocked because they have to protect their local. So if you look at that environment also, we need just to be careful. Probably we need a bigger strategy as Africa or as a regional countries that the blocks, where we can say, rather than having each country producing everything, we segment these products and say we zone them in terms of locally made products. Because at the end of the day, what matters is a quality, affordable product readily available at any particular time. Then coming to country specific, now I'll come to areas that you mentioned, like a quantification, which to me is still a level 3 target if we talk about access, because first things first is planning. Are we adequately planning to have these products on time? If yes, are we putting the resources? We haven't mentioned much about financing, but most of our sub-Sahara countries, after identifying the actual quantities that you need, then you adjust to what budget you have. So already you are shortchanging yourself because you don't have adequate financing to support the whole chain. And sometimes we just focus on the quantities of product and the price. But when it comes to planning and especially allocating resources, are the logistics resources, inbound logistics. Look at the cost of shipping, cost of clearance, and every day we have new numbers. For example, now the cost of clearing containers all over the world has gone up. In some of our countries, 3 times. We are paying $2,500, now we're paying $9,000. So that's overnight, everything has changed. So where do we put all these resources and set a system that has a whether predictive model or a marker that triggers you to say, I may anticipate this kind of a shift in terms of the resources allocation and also predicting risks that may affect our plans. Another one is Forex, which is very critical for us. But now coming back to once the product is in country, and maybe also to add, protecting local manufacturing versus imported, is how much incentive are we giving our local manufacturers that can compete with big pharma in India or in Europe or in China, where we get troubles because the prices are maybe 50% or even less compared to what we manufacture locally. Now coming to in-country, if you look at our systems, we're discussing as pharmacists. But who are the deciders? Who are the ones that really call the shots? Are the pharmacists calling shots in all these decisions? If you ask yourself to map from your institution, a central medical store, to your ministry, to your government as a whole, and out of 100% in terms of this decision, the sphere of influence that you're having, how much is the pharmacist having? In most cases, probably is less than 10%. Because the planners, the economists are there, the people who are setting the budget are there. You know, I set the policy on what I want. But at the end of the day, deciders are different. The logisticians has to do their job. Procuring specialists are doing their job. So at the end of the day, if we want to approach these access issues, I think we need to either extend our vision or our approach to non-pharmacist actors being the center point of how do we convert them to become supporters of the agenda rather than actors in their own scope. Because as a person that plans, then I just plan on my job. I'm a Minister of Finance allocating budget for importation of products and local manufacturing. But there's a pharmacist that decides what do you want, how much do you want, when do you want, and stuff like that. So I believe those, in terms of the bigger picture, we can go with that approach. But I agree with my friend Darius, because most of the things that we are focusing on are the health system strengthening blocks or building blocks of the health system. But at the end of the day, the key actions or key actors and influencers probably are outside that health system, and they're the ones who are really affecting most of the decision that we are making. And the last point, because I know I've spoken a lot, is really the regional integrations, multi-country approaches, but also looking at stop lumping everything together. The keynote speaker has spoken of so many things, but if you look at them, if you want to approach it and solve it, you map each of it and map each actor and map what do we need to address, and then you have a comprehensive approach to addressing that. Sorry, I've taken too long. My apology. Thanks.
No worries, no worries. Thanks for that holistic perspective that you've given us when it comes to access. And I know I'll come back to you for subsequent questions on the same. However, I just want to, I can see Jeremy's hand is up, and so I'll just ask him to comment. Please feel free to respond or even stress any points that the previous speakers have said, and then David will close this question afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Genuine. I just wanted to say a lot of what Dr. Tukai has said, I think is really, really important, and I couldn't agree more with the thrust of his argument. Two particular points I just wanted to emphasize. His very last point about getting other people involved, other decision makers. You know, there are a lot of pharmacists involved in this webinar, and that's great. But we have to get a broader constituency to tackle some of these challenges. That's people in government organizations like ministries of health and so on, but it's also the private sector and a whole range of other actors. So I think we need to have a wider vision than just pharmacists trying to crack this problem. The other thing I just wanted to mention is the questions over promotion of local manufacturing. And Dr. Tukai is absolutely right that we can't just think, oh, local manufacturing, that'll deal with it. There are a huge number of challenges, and my report set out some of those challenges. But I think one way of tackling those is to be very targeted. You know, to say local manufacturing is a very broad brush approach to it. We need to target specific subsectors, and there will be some that in the medium term are just not going to be possible, either because the technology is too complex and too challenging, or because the price competition from imports is too intense. But there are some sectors where it is possible to produce locally at the right level of quality, as Dr. Tukai says, at the right price, and where you can build the capacity to produce those products. So I would argue for targeted local manufacturing and the incentives that have to go along with that. Thank you, Genuine.
So much, Jeremy. Over to you, David.
Right. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to take part. I was going to emphasize that health overall is an inherently imperfect market. Who needs healthcare, good medicines, good surgery? Often those least advantaged, poorest, oldest, etc. Who can pay? The relatively rich. Medicines are special within healthcare because they're products which can be manufactured in large plants. For healthcare, you need local, accessible services. for medicines, you often need the efficiencies of scale. So that's the background for me. And within medicines too, the difference between today's leading edge drugs, the things which are just discovered, developed, still earning extra revenue via patents, and that funds the next generation of research in the private sector, and generic older medicines, which hopefully we can manufacture and supply cheaply. So against that background, for me, the solutions have got to be political and public sector alongside where we can use in the private sector, but the dynamics of private sector profit seeking often don't fit well with public health goals. What you've all said, Dr. Chukai, Jeremy, about the dangers of falling into the belief that local manufacturing is the solution. Of course, I want local jobs, and where we can efficiently package, deliver to local need, that's fine. But often you'll find major pharmaceutical companies just have 2 or 3 plants worldwide because there are huge savings to scale on large-scale manufacturing. The whole world can get products more cheaply where we exploit massive savings to scale. So opening up local production can be good, but it can also be a way of favoring local bourgeoisie, local elites who can own small factories. But it's not a very good solution for the people. Even if you take a great country like India with its manufacturing capacity in the generic area, the non-patented area, it for many decades has had problems with supplying to the poorest in the community, the poorest third of Indians. And those were related to the fact that even with generic drugs, even with low-cost ones, because they're low cost, it wasn't worth local manufacturers' attention. So there you have to have publicly guided investment. So for me, across the world, the great challenge and opportunity of this century is to really bring world health to levels of equity. That means, as well as continuing to develop new drugs and new treatments for cancers, which I'm now living with, amongst European and other relatively privileged populations seeking the next generation of treatment, we've got to have much better facility for making existing treatments available to the least advantaged. How can we do that? Well, I think we need international policy, international funding agencies often to facilitate things. This has been well shown in the vaccine area. We need governments committed to local supply, and we need strategic partnerships between private sector and public sector, facilitated by regulation, facilitated by realistic understanding of the economics involved, which allow those basic treatments, which are 90% of all treatments, genuinely to be manufactured and supplied in ways which don't create shortages from time to time, and which do make availability possible in the poorest areas, although that's also demands good healthcare, good diagnosis, all the other elements of treatment which need to go alongside effective drug use. That's where I'll finish my contribution. I hope it was of value, but basically we're in agreement.
Thank you so much for that icing on the cake, David. And I know we have spoken about this being a multifactorial and multi-sectorial issue, and the need for all of us to come together in a way to help bridge this supply gaps. But I'll slightly focus on the private sector, and I'll begin by hearing from Jeremy on how or the ways in which the private sector is addressing the many challenges that we've spoken about at a regional level or at a national level, and how this has essentially been implemented or how this has panned out. And then we can also hear from our colleagues from the region on any examples of strategic partnerships that have come up with the private sector to solve the medicine supply gap. Over to you, Jared.
Thanks, Genuine. I think there are three challenges with getting the private sector to help with addressing the issue of access to medicine. The first is how does it work alongside the government sector and alongside the regulatory structure? They need to be complementary actors. So where you have private sector logistics companies, is that helpful in distribution of drugs, physical distribution? Where you have investors, for example, Zipline in Rwanda, that's a good example, working with Rwanda Medical Supply to get drugs out very quickly, very efficiently, and they're expanding into Kenya as well. So I think there is an interesting area of opportunity there. The second thing I think is crucially investment capital. So the manufacturers that exist in East Africa at the moment are starved of investment capital. Bank borrowing is incredibly expensive. Where do you get that investment capital from? My view is it has to be foreign investment. It has to be inward investment. And the investment promotion agencies are working on that, but not many of them have pharmaceuticals as a high priority sector. There is a lot of focus on infrastructure. There's a lot of focus on electricity supply, which has already been mentioned, and it's a good point, but there's not a great focus on the pharmaceutical supply chain. So I think getting investment capital in is crucially important. And the third is about the market. And we've seen some rather disappointing exits from East Africa. Most recently, Moderna paused their manufacturing for vaccines in Rwanda, and they in Kenya, and they are only the latest in a number of exits from the region. So why are major pharmaceutical companies going in reverse when there is a huge market in East Africa and demand is growing, particularly in NCDs, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and so on, as well as cancer. And the only explanation, I think, is that they don't see the harmonization of regulation as sufficiently advanced to overcome the barriers. So can I be controversial for a moment, Genuine? The East African community has been working on regulatory harmonization for over 10 years. And I'm afraid we're not there yet. So it would be wonderful if manufacturers could access the whole of the East African region. Huge population, growing demand, potentially a low-cost production base. What could be better? But I think it's held back by a regulatory structure that isn't really helpful. So I'm sure people will have views on that, but that's where I am at the moment.
Great, and I know our colleagues from the region will also chime in on that. But I'll go next to David, and then we can have Darius and Moderator speak. Jocelyn, You can also chime in if you have a perspective from the other African regions.
Yes, I'm
Over
not
to you,
sure
David.
I've got much to add at this stage. I'd like to hear Jocelyn and Dr. Chukai's concerns. Again, that emphasizing that, in a way, for me, effective global medicine supply, we think on a very large scale, and we work out how, as a world community, we can most appropriately invest in research, development, and then mass supply. But that's got to be matched by really good local services. And I think it's a big danger. There is a place for local packaging and things like that, but it's a big danger if we put too much emphasis on local production of drugs as opposed to the local capacity to use medicines to the best effect.
Thanks, David. Darius, over to you.
Yeah, I want to thank the previous speakers on their take. And I want to put a little bit of light on the situation in East Africa as a resident of East Africa, and also a light on Rwanda and the situation. So when it comes to medicine and how the private sector would support the government, first of all, there is a need to create a strong collaboration. The mechanism on how the private is collaborating with the public sector. So this also involves a strong regulatory environment and policies. And in East Africa, we really need strong regulatory agencies that would regulate the medicine. As we reflect on how to close the gap, we also need to see what kind of medicine do we want? And most of information that would help private sector to decide lies in the government institution. How the private sector do we access information on what kind of drugs is really needed in East Africa? Can we, for example, if we say we need manufacturing, but what is the first drug which is consumed in East Africa? And for how long is it missing, at what level, so that we can take a decision? And this really needs to show that addressing the complexity of medicine supply chain requires more than private and more than private. It's really a whole society approach which is needed. So when we generate data, how to use them, how to communicate. If, for example, there is 90 million in DRC, but how do we access to that market? What is missing in DRC, which may be available in Kenya and yet expiring in stock in Kenya? So this kind of collaboration are really needed. And it's a call today that we are in digital era. How do we now enter this digital era and use it to close the gap? In my understanding, I do believe the pharmacy practice need to be integrated in digital era with response, and we get information that can help us. The previous speaker was talking about that the solution is not manufacturing. Of course, the solution may be manufacturing or not, but we don't have right information to decide, to influence policymakers that this is needed. So there is one example of zipline, which is being used here in Rwanda to deliver bread and the other products. This is a very good success story that can be shared to the community, that whenever we need a blood product, which can save a life, but the transport may take 2 hours and we can use technology to deliver in 5 minutes. What about other products? What about the situation in the whole East Africa to respond to this issue? So for me, we not only need the private sector, but we need the whole society approach to address the issue. Thank you.
So much, Darius. Moderator, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to build on Mr. Holmes when he talked about targeted approach. And I think the best way to do this, yes, we can manufacture locally, but we must target on a specific products. And I can give example of Tanzania where we can public by the MST Act of Establishment allows MST to also open factories to manufacture. But we cannot manufacture products that are already available in the private market and are manufactured locally. So every time you have to adjust your priorities on what products you want to engage in while conducting feasibility for manufacturing for you yourself to buy and sell to the network, because you know the private market has exhausted that. So we do that targeted approach and we identify areas, say, we don't need to go there because already the private sector has covered it adequately and we are comfortable. Number two is prioritizing. And this is where the pharmacist comes in, because we are the one who know exactly what product is taken, is needed where, when, and what are the features or qualities of the product that we need. You don't need to shoot for complex formulas. You don't need to shoot for new molecules. We shoot for generics. We shoot for things that are easy to make. You have syrups, you have infusions, you know, you have some generic tablets that are quickly made, you have topical products. And this is where a pharmacist needs to play a bigger role in identifying products that are easy. Some are simple compounding you can do in the facility. Some are you can do at a mid-scale or large-scale production that you can even export meat to the nearby country. And then now coming to financing, the problem is foreign financing versus local financing. And I think here is where the dilemma is, because when you take our local banks rates, commercial rates, you're talking about interest rates coming from between 80 and 25%. But if you get the same from Middle East or from Europe, it's between 1 to 3%. And that's where it becomes naturally, we all talk about foreign financing for capital investment of all these manufacturing sites. And the question we are having ourselves is, can we formulate something, a mechanism? Because of example of agricultural banking, you know, we have the development banking. Can we have something that is set aside funding like this and becomes a revolving for those who are financed to establish factories when they're turning the monthly services to the loans that they're receiving, then become a kind of a fund that is dedicated or ring-fenced to support only manufacturing. And that can lower also the interest rates, can lower also the terms and condition stringency, and can help local manufacturers to a point to progress. And number three, my point I wanted to make was the role of the private sector. Most of the time, we look at the public sector as doing everything. It may seem so, but if you look at the overall market in our countries, how much is the national medical supply chain? What percent of the business is the national medical supply chain or command? You may find that in most cases, probably 50, 45. If you go very high, 60. So the private sector plays a very huge role. It's just that the way we tell the story, we don't document that properly. So that's number one. And the same, the issue of private sector engagement. Most of manufacturing sites are privately owned. And if you look at the way we buy, even we buy locally, I can say I'm engaging private sector because when I buy from the local manufacturer, I'm buying from the private sector as well. So I think the synergism strategy should also look at the targeting that we talked about. Nurturing is another thing where we know we have problems. We know our capacity is not good. We know our prices may be high, but if we reach a certain stage, the numbers will balance, then I can say we protect it. But also the last one is fair competition. Fair competition is also critical here, especially when we have different manufacturers that are locally available and internationally available. You don't need to overprotect, but you also need to make sure that you don't kill the local. That is also important, and we'll see how can we do it. Incentivizing the local manufacturers one, by giving them tax incentive. But in cases, and this goes beyond the pharmaceutical sector or health sector, subsidizing the product. You have a local product that is $20. You import the same product that is $10 from India. You do the math and say, okay, for the year 1 and 2, I'll do 75% imported, 25% local. Year 2 is 70-30. Year 3, probably, you're going there. In that way, you're not disrupting anyone. You're not disrupting the whole chain. You're stabilizing, but at the same time also you're protecting. But it's easier said than done. When it comes now to really getting orders out, getting the local manufacturing work, if you don't support, it's difficult. But then support that you're providing, for example, as a procuring entity, I require also support from the financing part of the system. So it becomes the whole chain that requires to speak the same language. And I agree with on the targeting. If we can use targeted or target, and then that become our center point and everything revolve around a certain targeted intervention, I think we'll do very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those insights, Mabere. And I know you've mentioned a lot about foreign financing and local financing, and we will get to that later in our conversation. But I'd just like to pose a question to you before we move to Jocelyn's comments on the same topic. Spoken about the issue of protecting or promoting local manufacturing. Is there an existing national policy in your country that is focused on promoting and protecting it? And if there is, has it been effective in your opinion? Sorry, Mabere. You're on mute.
Yes. I thought you were talking up to Jocelyn. What was
No. I posed that question to you. Sorry.
Yeah. No? What was the question?
When I know you've spoken about policies to protect or to promote local manufacturing, and I'd like to know whether these policies are in existence in your country, and have they been effective so far?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. We have the preferential pricing of up to 15% for the local versus the imported product when you are doing procurement. We also have the, where you call it a negative listing of a product that you have sufficiently available manufactured in Tanzania and the prices are competitive. And we've done that. We've already exercised that as well. But the third area, which was a challenge, but now we're addressing, was if you're talking about importing a product, we use the bank letter of credit. In a way, it's advance payment, but if you're buying from a local manufacturer, it's cash on delivery. So we're trying to, we've already agreed, and we are in all our new contract documents or tender documents is making sure there's advance payment for the local manufacturer to make sure at least there's something to go to buy raw materials or packaging or anything. That is also something that is being practiced now. And the fourth one is also negotiation. We're not doing very well at the moment, but it's going to be like that, negotiating on scheduled delivery. So I give you a full year contract, but I negotiate based on your production capacity. But the last one, which are also doing very well, is we have restricted some tenders for local manufacturers only. They don't compete with the authorized dealer. They don't compete with international manufacturers. They only compete among themselves. So those are a few things we are moving. It's a long journey, but we started. So, and I'm sure it will take some time. When we look back, we'll see a few steps that are positive. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that insight, Mabere. I know Jeremy's hand is up, but I'll hand it over to Jocelyn, and then Jeremy, you can chime in. Over to you, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jenny. Right, I was just following the presentations from all the colleagues. I think when you look at access to medicines, one of the reasons why a number of countries were looking at manufacturing came up due to the COVID-19 pandemic, when there was the lockdown, and then the countries could not have access to medicines from where they used to get them from. They could not get raw materials. They could not get finished products. So it became a challenge. And I think this was a challenge to policymakers and governments. And as such, most governments within the region were thinking, what is the way forward to try and cover that gap, to have equity and access to medicines? And so you have a number of countries which came up with the development strategies to do local manufacturing. But of course, as been said by most of us presenters, it's not cheap, it's expensive, And the regulations, also the distribution in terms of the quantities, the quantification, when you produce for your population, it might be because the economies of scales are not met. So different countries were coming up with their different strategies. And this is since the COVID pandemic. And it's still something which people are still scared what happens next if we've got a similar situation. And of course, as alluded to by Dr. Mavere Tukai, it's the policymakers usually lead, whether it is the private sector or the public sector, resulting in a collaboration which would involve the private sector and the public sector. Whenever you are looking at this access to medicines, you need the multi-sectoral approach. The public sector and the private sector, they work together because some of the things which the public sector does usually when you look at the medicines, it covers most of the conditions, and the cost of medicines is usually lower there, whereas the private sector also comes in to complement what the government is doing. But the biggest percentage I can assume, I know in most countries, it's done by the government. And then the private sector also comes in to complement what is happening there. So the need for public-private partnerships or collaboration cannot be underestimated. And then when I talk about development strategies within the region, I've been to a number of our members within the African Pharmaceutical Forum who have come up with a national development strategy to try and do what Tanzania is also doing, where they've got protection for the local manufacturer and for a number of products. And in my own country, we've got a statutory instrument, which is saying the local manufacturers can produce these. If you want to import them, you need clearance from the Ministry of Health and Child Care. So it's to try and support, it's a development strategy to try and support the local manufacturer. But as alluded to by other speakers, it is targeted. Certain lines, you can't say, we're just going to close and do local manufacture. It doesn't work. They have to pick on a number of items, the ones which they will find you have got enough volumes, and also the local industry, the local community or the local population can use, and then maybe even follow up with exportation. But as also alluded earlier on, the policies on manufacturing and registration of medicines in the different countries makes it very difficult. Harmonization has also been very difficult, even for us. In the SADC region, we've had started off with 4 countries trying to do harmonization in terms of manufacturing, and they are also signatories to the AMA and so on. But it has taken a long time because each country is trying to satisfy its needs, and COVID didn't make it any better. It has even made it slower because during that period, people are now focusing on the different things and also focusing on vaccines, new medicines, and even the basic, what we call essential medicines in terms of the Essential Drugs Action Program got sort of waylaid because there was a focus at that period. But now as countries go back to maybe normal situation, we'll be able to get better things happening there. So at the end of the day, there's a need, the private sector and the public sector should be working together, collaboration, private-public partnership, and to ensure equity. What is the best way to attain equitable availability of products in the different countries? And even the human resources, do you have the equity, the quality of human resources? Are they trained adequately to be able to distribute the products which have come in? The wholesalers, they import or they get from local manufacturers and then they distribute in country, but there's the need for equitable systems for equitable distribution to improve access. I think I can stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for those very important points. we'll speak a little about the regulatory framework in a few, but I'll hand it over now to Jeremy to make his point. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Genuine, and thanks, Jocelyn and Maveri. Just picking up on Jocelyn's really good points. The issue of targeting has come up a lot in our discussions so far, and I think you're absolutely right, Jocelyn. We need to be very focused about what kind of products should we concentrate on, and which products have the potential for more local supply. And we talk quite a bit about regulatory harmonization, which you will have gathered I feel quite strongly about, and it seems, Jocelyn, you have similar views. So we need to get onto that case. And thirdly, your point, Jocelyn, about the public-private partnership model is so important. These shouldn't be competing sectors. Actually, they need to work in partnership. But I wanted, if I may, Genuine, just to go back for a moment to what Maveri said about local support for domestic manufacturers and procurement preference for domestic manufacturers, as he's described in Tanzania, is important and helpful, but it doesn't do it on its own. And I'm sorry to say the pharmaceutical sector in Tanzania has been pretty well static in terms of growth for some years, despite procurement preference for local manufacturers. And I think a big issue here is scale. One reason that imports are so cheap is they are produced at enormous scale. As David was saying, the economies of scale for some of these generic products are vast. And if you're just producing for Tanzania, it's very hard to get to that scale, which leads us back to regulatory harmonization. So you can have programs, supporting local manufacturers, and in Kenya, they have Build Kenya Buy Kenya. They have the same in Uganda, Build Uganda, Buy Uganda. But the manufacturer is only going to get to scale if they can access a bigger regional market. If they were able to do that in certain selected products, then they might be more price competitive with imports, and you not only have a closer supply chain, some might say a less vulnerable supply chain, but you have jobs, you have economic growth, you have all the other advantages of a domestic pharmaceutical industry, which is going to generate GDP. So that's got to be a good thing.
Definitely, Jeremy, and thank you for making that point. And I just want to also just ride on that train that you've already began and focus a little bit on the framework, the regulatory harmonization framework that, again, is part of the larger African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Program. And as Jocelyn has mentioned, is that it has been very difficult for them as the Southern African Development Community. However, I'd also love to hear from our colleagues in the East Africa region on how this initiative has been in the region, how easy or difficult it has been to implement this. And Jeremy, you've already stated the benefits of having this harmonized regulatory environment. But with the existing challenges that our colleagues will mention, how exactly are they able to also overcome this and ensure that this progresses forward to even the national level? Over to you, for that.
Thank you very much. But unfortunately, I may not be a very good contributor because it's a little bit out of my comfort zone. Because what I know is the incentives, the initiatives are there, not only the East African Community Regulatory Harmonization. In the SADC region of Zazibona also, where there is a a lot of effort going on to make sure we harmonize that. My critical question as a system user or beneficiary is what could be the incentive or what could be the factors behind us taking so long? And I may not be the best person to respond to. I worked on about 20 years ago, 21 years ago, we engaged in East Africa Regional Pharmaceutical Forum. We're trying to do pool procurement. It took over 20 years, it's never materialized. So it's difficult for me to respond, but I think most of us may speculate what are the reasons behind, would come to individual regulatory entity benefits and losses. If you relinquish your national a chapter or your national package, and then you give it to become a regional, I may not be the best expert for that. So I'll be interested to learn from the rest. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Robert. Darius, do you have any thoughts on this? And then we can go to David if he has any thoughts on this as well.
Thank you. As someone coming from the private sector, maybe I will just share what I know in terms of harmonization, what is going on. Starting from maybe today, professional body are now doing enough work to harmonize education. And there is a good progress there, the harmonization of education of pharmacists across East Africa. That will also enable free movement of professionals across the East African community. And there is also very good initiative like having Center of Excellence in the supply chain. And there is a Center of Excellence in supply chain here in Kigali. And many professionals have benefited from that training, and we are seeing its impact. And as far as regulatory itself is concerned, I do know that in East Africa, different countries are at different levels of regulation. And there is still a long way to go to have the same level of regulatory environment that will also bring reliance on if there is an assessment for registration dossier in Kenya, so that maybe it can be relied on in Uganda. So this is also a work in progress, and professional regulatory bodies like Food and Drugs authorities are progressing very well. So I don't have too much to say on that, but we are seeing progress, and as countries are moving forward to integrate, to have a common East African society, professionals also, we will follow the same fate. Thank you.
Thanks, Darius. Over to you, David.
I found that very helpful, Darius. I'm reminded how long it took Europe to manage to get its regulatory approaches together and some sort of harmonization, regardless of Brexit leaving things. Good regulation saves lives, helps focus on efficiency and well-being. Bad regulation can get in the way of progress. It can be misused to stop local development in poor countries if sometimes you put in regulations which can only be afforded in very rich settings. And it can undermine the health of populations which are not getting access using conventional models, again, built on often developing country experience. So with pharmacy, one could imagine situations in which too much focus on conventional pharmacy supply rather than less regulated environments actually stop the population getting access. I've done a lot of work over my time on something called the polypill, combinations of antihypertensives and a statin used to prevent cardiovascular disease rather than just its treatment. This has been very difficult to do, even in countries like the UK, because of the regulatory demands. And even though we know doctors are using low-dose combinations of antihypertensives and statins just normally, to get a drug license like that is terribly difficult. As we cope with infections in African and other less developed, and I hope that word doesn't sound insulting, but less economically advanced settings, then you obviously get the emergence of cardiovascular disease, problems like diabetes, the vulnerability to cancers, etc. I think we should be looking at strategies which, alongside ensuring supply, just making sure a certain tonnage of drug is available, make sure we're getting those routes to access appropriate. And that puts new demands on pharmacy in areas like Africa, which are quite different from those in, say, an area like the Netherlands. It's about leading appropriate supply, but not over-professionalizing it, not over-regulating it, where the advantage of the freer access outweigh the advantages of tightly controlled access. I hope that's of some use, but I think it goes with this general debate.
Thank you so much for that input, David. And I know we're just being conscious of time. I really want us to touch on the topic of financing, because it has come up several times in our conversation. And I'd just love to hear your thoughts, beginning with Jeremy, on the idea of injecting and the opportunities of injecting capital and technology in the region through foreign direct investments. And also to just hear from the rest of the speakers in what ways we think these investments can be delivered and how we can ensure that they're sustainable. Even the work that it does is sustainable in the long term. I'll hand it over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Genuine. Yes, I think you put your finger on one of the really severe limiting factors in further development of the industry. We've talked about regulation, we've talked about targeting of products, we've talked about a number of the other factors, but this problem of access to capital is a really severe problem. And my own belief is getting inward investment is a critical way of dealing with that. And I spent some time with the investment promotion agencies in each of the countries that I went to visit, and there are opportunities there, as we've said before, in targeted sectors, and most recently, Darius may know about this, but I've been talking with a US investor in the development of a plant to produce IV infusions. So originally the plant was being developed to produce antiseptics and disinfectants, and they're just about to start production of that, but there is spare capacity there. I mean, they're only using about 1/5 of the plant. So I've been talking to them about IV infusions. And I remember so well a conversation I had in Uganda, where this was at the Uganda Investment Agency. They said, we even import our saline. We have water, we have salt, okay, you need sterile conditions, but, it's not that difficult. So, there are real opportunities there, and that's the way to get financing. And if a foreign investor can see a market opportunity, they will be up for that. And this is not only a big market opportunity, it's a growing market opportunity, especially in areas like NCDs, which we touched on. So I think that's the way to generate more investment capital.
Thanks, Jeremy. We'll go over to Darius to also share his thoughts on foreign direct investments and how we can make all the work that it does a little bit more sustainable. Darius, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think when it comes to financing, it's really very important to mention, because it's one of the biggest driver for the success of any private entity, financing. And the previous speakers have said that there is still an issue to access finance from routine banks because of interest rate, which is really high. And we have seen good progress, countries being aware that there is a need for investment in agriculture, and they secure fund for agriculture sector. So today also there is a need for having a fund for health sector, maybe broad, or specifically for pharmaceuticals. Because medicine itself, when you treat, you diagnose, at the end, if you don't give the right medicine, all efforts are in vain. So there is a need to have a basket which is specific for pharma manufacturing. And as my colleague have mentioned, the really medicine, when we hear them, we find that they are really complex molecules, but they are not at all if you have already studied what is a medicine. So as we have said, if you do targeted, we can start in East Africa with those which are simple, which requires small investment. It's really possible to convince an investor to invest $100,000 than investing for a plant of $7 or $10 million. So we need to raise also awareness among professionals and entrepreneurs that medicine, they are not too complex. There are some which are complex, of course, like vaccine, which needs efforts and a huge capital to ingest in. But there are also other which are simple, that can be easily manufactured within the available investment in the countries of ours. So my take on this is that if countries could avere a specific fund for pharma manufacturing, that would be a very good start. And they offer targeted bank interests which are affordable for the viability of the project. Thank you so much.
Darius, insights. Over to you, Moderator, then Jocelyn.
Thank you very much. I'm in agreement with what has been discussed, and I'll be very brief. I believe we are financing access to health commodities, and my approach would be looking at different layers of it. In terms of funds to buy medicines, we get government subsidies or advances, also recoup from insurance schemes and other mechanisms that we get out of pocket. If you consolidate that figure, is a huge figure. But if you take it in district health facilities or in district intervention, it's a very small figure, but on totality, it's a huge amount of money that if at one way or another, innovatively, we could ring fence the health commodities funding in general to manufacture, to buy, and to use. If we are recovering anything from the insurance scheme also, can be kind of putting a pot. I know it's becoming more socialist looking than the free economy. I think it's somewhere you can have the fund that can also contribute to supporting local manufacturers. Number two, of course, we also spoken about banking, but subsidy is also a means of financing. But I think another area where we can spend on is earmark funding. In many developing countries, we have these things like, special fund for roads, special fund for electricity, special fund, and these are charged through taxes, where you talk about you pay more for beer because there's a 1 shilling or 0.01% heading to supporting the certain intervention on the roads. But remember, the biggest burden taken from the cigarettes and the drinks that we're using is the health sector. So I think in one way or another, earmark funding for that can also be another avenue in addition to the FDIs and the other banking avenues. Thank you.
Thanks, Moderator. Over to you, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much. I won't take much of your time. Financing. Money. It's usually what we would need for these programs to actually take off the ground. Because when I used to train young pharmacists, and then I would always remind them that when you look at the budget in any institution where there's a medicines, the second largest budget is the medicines themselves. And as such, there's need for adequate budgeting towards financing for medicines and medical devices. And it would be good if our governments would have policy in their fiscus, which has got a big, which looks at how much is required to support the health sector with a special target on medicines. Unfortunately, most of our countries in Africa, we are relying on donations, and then we are getting donor fatigue. And we cannot really, we don't know how long this will sustain us, as long as governments and policymakers, we don't put this seriously in our fiscus to have finances for pharmaceuticals. And then also to strengthen our pharmaceutical industry, or the whole sector. The technology transfer, I think, has been mentioned earlier on. The technology investment in a technology and the transfer from those who are already doing certain things. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We learn from those who are using certain technologies, and then we adopt and adapt for our different countries. And then when it comes to manufacturing, I think one of the challenges is actually capacity utilization, because we will be making so much, but the capacity, the people we want to serve is small. And as such, we have an underutilization of the manufacturing plants, which I think is a challenge for our manufacturers. And someone has also said something about salt and water issue. I visited one of the countries and they said, oh, we've got plenty of salt. We can easily manufacture normal cell line drips. But one of my colleagues there was in industry actually mentioned on what is required to ensure that the drip, the normal cell line, yes, the salt drip is of the quality required. Especially these days, we are talking about quality medicines and so on. And counterfeits, to avoid counterfeits. It might sound very simple. You just put a bit of salt in water, shake, and give, but it needs a certain quality in terms of our legislation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jocelyn. And finally, to you, David, as we wrap up this discussion.
The historic position with medicines, of course, was that they often occupied a very large proportion of the costs of poorer countries' health spending, perhaps 30, perhaps 50%. And this was also need to pay in hard cash, in hard currencies rather, which could be seen as a drain on national resources compared with spending on locally produced items. Now, there's been movement, there's been reduction in the proportion of health spend across most countries going on drugs. But there is still this issue of it's very different paying one's local nursing or medical staff with local currency than having to pay for imported medicines. I fully understand that. My feeling is a lot of this does need to be backed by international effort. Where we've got high priority medicines, the HIV/AIDS crisis was a very good example where suddenly the world needed to supply some of the world's newest and most sophisticated drugs in some of the world's least advantaged, most deprived environments. And it revealed terrible cracks in the system. Now, as we start to face, for example, better cancer treatments worldwide, we're going to have very similar problems, I think, for years to come. I think the solution to that can only be at a multinational level, international agencies prepared to support funding for these international products in appropriate ways. There are all sorts of dimensions to this other than that, about movement of some drugs purchased at a subsidized level to other markets and that sort of thing, which undermines everybody involved. But I won't go into that. I would just add that in addition to local sound use of local resources, an investment which really is focused on national development, not the protection of a relatively small elite. This can't work, and we can't get very much better unless we accept global political responsibility for world health improvement. That would be my message, which I know is superfluous to much of your debate, but I think nevertheless it's worth stating.
Thank you so much, David. And I know we could continue this conversation for another hour if we could. However, it has been lovely, and I would sincerely like to thank all our panelists for their invaluable insights and ideas. And I believe that it has been quite informative for the audience, that we've all learned something from this deep discussion. As I earlier mentioned, that the recording of this episode will be made available on the events.feed.org website, and you can also find all upcoming digital events listed there as well. I'd also just like to briefly shine a spotlight on upcoming 82nd FIP World Congress of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences that is going to be held in Cape Town, South Africa, on the 1st of September 2024. The theme for the conference is Innovating for the Future of Healthcare. And we have, next slide, please. And we have various themes that will be covered, including equitable quality healthcare, revolutionizing healthcare with AI, and innovative drug discovery and access. The early bird registration for that is still ongoing, and it closes at the end of this month. Please feel free to go to the Congress site and then take advantage of this discount. Next slide, please. Please, again, feel free to give us your feedback on the digital events on the webinar we've just had at webinars@feed.org, so we may continue to improve our digital event offerings to you and make this even better. Thank you very much, and good day to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Panelists.